Loan Amendment Bill.
I call the honourable member Chris Hipkin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, when Maggie Barry started speaking, I thought I'd entered a parallel universe in which all of the legislation to do with student loans was considered by the local government and Environment Select Committee. I'm not entirely sure what's going on over there. As far as I know, this bill's never been to the local government and Environment Select Committee. Perhaps a little bit too much roundup going in there. But Mr Speaker, I think that the language that Maggie Barry was using was quite revealing. When the National Party start talking about education as a privilege, I think they start to reveal their true colours and what they really believe about education. What they really believe about education, which is it's a privilege, because that is what the National Party are all about. The National Party, the party of privilege. The party that stand there for those who can afford things, those who have the money, but not those who are trying to work their way up the ladder of opportunity. In fact, what this government are all about is pulling the ladder up. Once they've got up to the top, they'll pull the ladder up and rob that opportunity for those who come behind them. Mr Speaker, the student loan scheme is incredibly important in the sense that it offers many people who wouldn't otherwise be able to participate in tertiary education the opportunity to do so. It means that cost is not a barrier. However, we should never forget that the student loan scheme was put in place ultimately because an intergenerational compact, if you like, was broken down, where previously generations who had their tertiary education for free decided to start charging future generations for that. And under the last Labor government, we saw a lot of progress towards turning that clock back a little bit. We saw the interest-free student loans coming in. We saw an increase in student allowances. We saw a cap on tertiary tuition fees and a number of things all designed to reduce the cost, the overall cost of participating in tertiary education. Now, if we want students, graduates, repaying their loans faster, which this bill purports to do, one of the things we should be thinking about doing is how we stop them borrowing so much in the first place. And unfortunately, under this government, they're going the other way. We saw just this week the government announcing that they're not going to increase the parental income thresholds for student allowances in line with inflation. It's an arbitrary cut to the number of students who can get a student allowance. We're going to see more of that under this national government. That is going to result in more borrowing. It's not going to result in less borrowing, it's going to result in more borrowing. If we want less student loan debt and students repaying their loans faster, then avoiding them borrowing money in the first place is a really important way of doing that, and unfortunately this government don't want to go anywhere near that. There are some sensible provisions in this bill that the Labor Party supports, and we've canvassed those in the committee stage. I am only going to focus on the area where we really disagree with the government on, and that's to do with the repayment holiday for those who travel overseas. I think the ground has been well covered on this particular issue. It was a very sensible decision to introduce a holiday when interest-free student loans were introduced in the first place, to allow people who were travelling overseas doing their OE to not have to make repayments on their loans. Because what we saw over a period of time was people travelling overseas racking up huge penalties on their loans while they were away that acted as a huge disincentive for them returning home. So initially that was set at 1 year. Some actually argued that that was probably too much, and in fact it should have been shorter than that. And I know there was a lot of internal debate within the then Labor government about what the appropriate time frame was. Michael Cullen, who was the minister in charge of implementing at the time, set it at 1 year. He was right to set it at 1 year at the time. In fact, it probably wasn't long enough. And so therefore a pragmatic decision was made to increase it to 3 years. We know it was a pragmatic decision because Mr Pragmatic himself, Mr Peter Dunn, argued in favour of that as the Minister of Revenue. In fact, I think he sponsored the bill to increase the holiday, the repayment holiday, from 1 year to 3. And he called it he waxed lyrical about how he was all about pragmatism and how this was such a good thing. And yet now, here we are with another bill sponsored by Peter Dunn that actually reverses it. Which I think just goes to illustrate that Peter Dunn's view of pragmatism is whatever it takes to keep him his ministerial job. So it was pragmatic for him to support this amendment today, because pragmatically that's what he has to do to remain a minister in this government. Common sense is basically what is required in order for Peter Dunn to stay a minister. That seems to be the acid test for Peter Dunn these days. Will I still get to keep my ministerial job if I vote for it? Yes, I will. Oh gosh, that must be common sense. I'm going to vote in favour of it, even if it wasn't common sense when I voted against it last time. So, Mr Speaker, it's a bad provision in the bill, and that is the reason why the Labour Party is going to be voting against this piece of legislation.
I call the honourable member Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker.